Leeds International School, Form 1, First Term, English Literature, and the lesson is Up in the Attic. Learning objectives: to enable the learner to communicate effectively and appropriately in real-life situations. To use English effectively for study purpose across the curriculum. And also to develop interest in and appreciation of literature, to develop and integrate the use of the 4 language skills: reading, listening, speaking, and writing. Let's read the poem. And something's staring. In the dark, in the dust, boxed Christmas lights, big tooth from a shark, sad rocking horse, a model Noah's Ark, cobwebby comics, doll's house painted green, dusty wine bottles, a bust of the Queen, leather-bound books, all sewing machine. Up in the Attic poem was written by Wes Magee. Wes Magee is a poet and children's author who was born in Greenock, Scotland in July 1939. One of his most well-known works in the poem, Windows. He has published 6 collections of poetry for adults and more than 90 books for children, including poetry, fiction, plays, picture books, and anthologies. He now lives in the hamlet of Thorgill on the North Yorkshire moors. Up in the Attic. First of all, let me introduce you what is an attic. Attic, a space or a room inside or partly inside the roof of a building. Now these poems have a specific structure. Right? Now in this poem, it does not have a specific rhyming pattern or a rhyming scheme. That is the main thing. But it is full of visual imageries. In the dark, in the dust, boxed Christmas lights, big tooth from a shark, sad rocking horse. There are so many things that's stored inside the attic. So it gives us the visual imaginations of the poem. A model Noah's Ark, cobwebby comics, even a doll house painted in green color, and some dusty wine bottles, and a bust of the Queen, and leather-bound books, and all sewing machines. Now these words are really practical, and these poems are really practical. Right? Now these types of poems we called as concrete poetry. That means we just not has a specific structure inside the poem, but it gives a real and deeper meaning for the readers. So Up in the Attic is a poem like that. So we call the poems as concrete poetry. Now children, you can see here another poem, and Down in the Cellar. Down in the cellar, brown boot in a box, remains of a coat, 2 brass mantel clocks, buckets and brushes, and musty old socks, damp pile of coal, and splintered pine door and rusty rat trap, and a snaggle-toothed saw, 6 mildewy blankets piled on the stone floor, and something's breathing. Now it is also same as Up in the Attic now, but the title is different. It's Down in the Cellar. The things which are kept down in the cellar of a house. So, we can imagine the things that are inside the house: brown boots and 2 brass mantel clocks. There are buckets and brushes. Then old socks are very old, and damp file of coal, and a very old pine door, and the rat trap got rusty, and 6 blankets. So many things are there, right? Now, concrete poetry, sometimes also called shape poetry. Now, this is also very shape poem. Is a poetry whose visual appearance matches the topic of the poem. Is that true? Yes, that is true, because the visual appearance is already 100% matches to the topic. These words, the words form shapes which illustrate the poem's subject as a picture, as well as through their literal meanings. This type of poetry has been used for thousands of years since the ancient Greeks began to enhance the meanings of their poetry by arranging their characters in visually pleasing ways back in the 3rd and the 2nd centuries. Right? Now you can see, for an example, I gave you Up in the Attic. That title also goes with the poem, and it gives us a visual imagination, and even the Down in the Cellar poem gives us a very good mental pictures. Now children, I am going to give you the definition for concrete poetry. What do you mean by concrete poetry? Concrete poetry is an arrangement of linguistic elements in which the typographical effect is more important in conveying meaning than verbal significance. It is sometimes referred to as visual poetry, a term that has now developed a distinct meaning of its own. So children, in simply we can say it is all about the visual imaginations, and the topics are 100% matches with the heading of the poem. In this slide, we are going to learn more about concrete poetry. What is it? As I told you before, a concrete poem is also called as a shape poem. Now here in the example, you can see a concrete poem. So it does not have a particular shape, right? This poem is also called Green. The title is Green. So how does the shape of the poem relate to the subject of the poem? Now when you read the lines, you can see that green color is related with the poem. Can you write a poem of your own? Yes. How we are going to write a concrete poem? First thing is, you have to choose an object to be the subject for your poem. That is the main thing. Good suggestions for beginners could be favorite animals or favorite foods. So you can start from a simple thing. And the second step is draw a simple outline of its shape on a paper or on the computer. It is very easy. If you are using a paper, draw with a pencil, not a pen. Then, inside that sketch, write your poem normally. That is how all the famous poets, they are going to write the concrete poems. In this slide, we are going to learn about the characteristics of concrete poems. Now, concrete poetry is also called pattern or shape poetry. As I told you before, the special point is about the visual appearance that matches the subject or the poem. The emphasis on the form separates the genre from other types of poetry. By selecting an object to focus your poem on, you can easily write your own concrete poem. So the first one is, it involves brainstorming ideas. Now these two poems, Up in the Attic and Down in the Cellar, when we read the poem, we feel very natural. So it gives us so many ideas. The purpose is to connect the reader's ideas of the poems with the appearance. That is true. When we read Up in the Attic, we used to read the things that are inside an attic. So it can be a Noah's Ark, it can be wine dusty bottles, everything that is connected with the poem. Third one is the subject can be anything that can be expressed in a shape. Yes, do you think that Up in the Attic poem has a shape? Yes, it has a shape. The subject can be anything. Subject is up in the attic. And the poem is about the things which are stored in the attic. That is very simple. But poetry is like that. And the tone is very often light-hearted. That means very simple language used by the poets. Because in concrete poems, normally we don't use very complex language. The shape of the poem is more important than sound of the poem. That is the special thing. So my dear children, today we learnt about concrete poems, and the poem Up in the Attic and the Down in the Cellar are the examples for concrete poetry. And we learn what is a concrete poem, right? It is a shape poem, right? And the subject is already matching with the lines in the poem, right? And we discuss about the characteristics of concrete poetry, right? So it gives us brainstorming ideas, right? And the subject can be anything, but the expressions are very important. And we discuss about the examples for concrete poetry. And finally, I gave you a clear description of the poem Up in the Attic. I hope you understood the lesson very well. So thank you very much for listening. Have a nice day.